Thank you for tuning into the Bully Pew Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the intrepid supporters of Protestia, insider supporters who support this ministry on an ongoing basis over at patreon.com/Protestia. Special shout out to new insider supporters who have joined this week, and of course, the ongoing shout out to you longtime insider supporters who quite literally keep the lights on around here, keep the website up, keep the research going, the ability for us to get information out to you in terms of what's going on out there in the broader evangelical conversation, Christian community, and get stuff in front of you. Religion News Service reported a couple of days ago on the Sam Allberry controversy. I guess that's probably the best way to describe it, a controversy. I think it's still a controversy, to be honest with you. But was kind enough to link back to Protestia as the ministry that really got this on the radar. Not that it wouldn't have been on the radar, eventually, but part of the reason that I hope that you guys support what we do is because you believe in the work that we're doing, and you believe and agree with our I guess more fundamentalist theological perspective. Bethel McGrew, who very brilliant writer on X, obviously don't agree with everything that she says if you see interaction between the two of us, but yeah, she described us as fundies the other day, and I said, well, all right, I can confirm that. I don't necessarily run away from fundamentalism as a concept or even a term. We don't particularly like around here when terms are disconnected from any sort of practical meaning, any sort of usefulness, any sort of utility. And so, yeah, I don't run away from that. Our theological perspective revolves around biblical inerrancy, biblical sufficiency, the centrality of the person, work, and propitiation of Jesus Christ. There are theological particulars that are specific to what we do, and all of the work that we do is subject to those things. And we trust that, generally speaking, while we don't have full agreement, obviously, with everybody who supports this ministry, that the primary reason this ministry exists is something that we all agree on: the need for this, the need for watchdogs of sort. Although I've been recently critical of certain kinds of watchdog ministries, but the willingness to just report things and just bring things to your attention. 99.9% of what Protestia brings to your attention are things that are already out there. Very rarely are we going and digging for more information. Ironically, the supposed watchdog ministries, the ministry watches and the Julie Roys and things like that, well, they do investigations, but their investigations, their investigations are dominated by and almost exclusively, let me go call so-and-so and then just report what they tell me. Just reprint what they tell me. I'm going to interview so-and-so. I'm not going to take ownership of this information or come to a conclusion or, God forbid, apply any sort of ethical or moral analysis to this. I'm just going to, at least not overtly. I mean, obviously, I would argue that they do that. They just don't say it. But primarily, it's a so-and-so said this about so-and-so. So-and-so said this about such and such Christian leader. Let's publish it. And yeah, we don't do a lot of that at Protestia. To the extent that we do investigations and things, it really is from a perspective of us taking ownership of that information and saying, this is what, we're willing to publish this and defend it and argue for it. Not, this is what so-and-so said. If you have a problem, go talk to them. And of course, again, most of the stuff that we write about, that we publish, that we report on, are things that are anybody could potentially report on. But you guys come to us because we organize it, and you trust our worldview and theological perspective from which we report these things. We're going to be talking about on this Bully Pew podcast the particulars of not only some of the really concerning things about this Sam Allberry controversy, situation, crisis, maybe for Immanuel Nashville, depending on how you want to look at it. We're going to be talking about some of the the concerning issues about the case itself, about the situation itself, really stemming from their statement, the church's statement. The Gospel Coalition announced it, then the church announced it, and all of this. And there were concerning things, and I would argue admissions of real systemic problems at that church in the statement. But we're also going to delve a little bit into what has been colloquially called, and I guess it's pretty much accepted in evangelical discourse at this point, side B theology versus side A theology. And there are so many different versions of this. There's so many different combinations of ways that people look at things and describe things within the quote unquote LGBT, Christian community, if you could call it that. I put Christian in scare quotes, of course, largely when we discuss this issue. But there's so many different combinations that I've heard people talk about, well, there's side B, there's side A, there's side X, there's side this, there's side that. But we're gonna try to just leave it focused on this is side A versus side B, because as those of us who are saying, hey, we warned you about the danger and the false teaching, really, that is quote unquote side B theology, celibate SSA, same-sex attracted persons within the church who can be obedient by just not acting on their desires, kind of thing. We warned you about the danger. Now we're seeing a real-life example of that danger. And now, of course, people are rushing to their keyboards to say, no, Sam Allberry isn't SSA, or he's not side B, or he's not. It's like for years and years and years, nobody pushed back against that idea. It was like, no, that's exactly what he teaches, but it's okay. That was the defense, is like, no, he teaches this, but it's actually biblical. He teaches this, but you shouldn't criticize him for it. He's actually being obedient. Now the conversation is shifting to no, he never really taught side B theology. And some folks, I think, are trying to get away with this. Some folks on social media are trying to get away with this, really by the same techniques and the same sort of rhetorical obfuscation and confusion that Allberry himself would engage in, and a lot of the side B proponents, the leading names in this movement, and it is a movement. The same things that all of those folks used on a regular basis. And one of the big components of, well, let me start with this for those of you that may not know, a real quick description of side B theology. And again, there are various flavors of this, but the crux of it is the idea that being attracted, sexually, emotionally attracted to someone of the same sex, the way that you would be to someone of the opposite sex, is a desire that you're going to have, that people are basically born with, or that it's developed in something that they can't shake even after salvation, and therefore they can be obedient to God by simply not acting it out, by resisting it. So the desire may always be there. This desire that the Bible describes as an unnatural desire or a vile affection will always be there. You shouldn't expect it necessarily to be mortified even after being saved. But you can be obedient. You can be an obedient Christian like Sam Allberry. You can be a pastor at a church even, so long as you are able to remain celibate, not act out those desires. And there's various things, teachings in the Bible about sexuality, about singleness, about these kinds of things that are twisted to support this. But the crux of the position from a theological perspective is the equivocation of what Romans 1, Paul talks about exchanging natural function for unnatural. In the later verses of Romans 1, the crux of side B is equivocating those two things. So it's moving what the Bible clearly describes as an unnatural affection, an unnatural desire, into the category of being natural. And therefore, even after salvation, even after coming to Christ, a Christian shouldn't necessarily expect a mortification or a removal or a change in heart or mind with regard to these desires. So somebody like a Sam Allberry or a Rachel Gilson or Rebecca McLaughlin in this category, is they teach and they argue for the idea that this is kind of their cross to bear. These desires, these desires for what should be desires for the opposite sex, desires for the same sex. There's not anything that they particularly can or need to, and this is a trick, or need to mortify about these things. Instead, their cross to bear, or their walk of obedience, is going to be revolving around just not acting it out. And again, there are various flavors of this. There are different ways to describe it. A lot of the folks that are defending Sam Allberry and saying he's not he's taught that SSA is sin, same-sex attraction is sin. Well, yes and no. Rhetorically, he's taught that, but logically speaking, he hasn't taught that. That's why there are videos on social media right now of him saying that, and then 2 seconds later, he's talking about the sin being actually acting it out. And how does he do this? Well, it's a rhetorical bait and switch, because we know that human nature, if we are believers in the theological concept known as total depravity, we know that our sinful nature corrupts every part of who we are. Every part of our being is corrupted and affected in some way by sin. Now, we don't say that total depravity means that you're as depraved as you can possibly be, but it does mean it's total in the sense that it corrupts every part of who we are, every part of our nature as human beings, the things that God created for good and righteous and worthy purposes, like sexual attraction, like procreation, like the complementary nature of men and women, things that God designed before the fall into sin, are now corruptible, and indeed are commonly corrupted by our sinful nature. And so when Sam Allberry says something like, well, SSA is sinful, it's a sinful thing, he is stealthily placing it in the same category as every other human desire or affection or part of who human beings are that are often corrupted by our sinful nature. So in the same way that a man who lusts after a woman who's not his wife, you might even be able to describe it as lusting at all, but he's experiencing or entertaining sexual attraction to someone who's not his wife, thereby corrupting what is within the bounds of matrimony and within the bounds of God's design, a righteous. Sorry about the squeak there. It's been snowing here today, and my windshield wipers are wiping off and squeaking as they go. But anyway, the man who disorders or has corrupted in his sinful nature what would ordinarily be, or what should be or could be, a righteous desire, a righteous attraction, something God designed for good. Sam Allberry is moving what the Bible describes as an unnatural desire into that same category. So he's saying, hey, I'm admitting it's sinful, just like all things are sinful. I'm admitting this is can lead to sin, is corruptible, just like everything else is corruptible. And that equivocation then allows him to say, well, just like the straight man who has a natural desire for women, so long as he doesn't entertain that or act it out or move towards it in some way, he doesn't give that sin quarter. He doesn't allow it to fester and grow and things. In the same way that the straight man can resist that temptation, the SSA, the same-sex attracted man, can also do that and thereby be obedient. And the thing that is being lost is the idea that he has secretly equivocated between the two and placed both of them into the realm of what is natural. And the problem is that the Bible doesn't support this. The Bible clearly delineates between the two. And it talks about, and I know that there's some disagreement even among, I think, brothers who teach properly on this issue. There's some disagreement about the extent to which all homosexual desire, SSA desire, identification with it, so on and so forth, is a result of the end of what we might call the Romans 1 path downward. Romans 1 talks about God giving them over to these unnatural desires because they didn't worship him and recognize him. And even though he made it very obvious who he was through things that have been made, they chose instead to worship creepy crawly things and be idolaters. And so because of that, they were given over to these desires. I'm more in the camp of that being the norm rather than some sort of an exception. And the fact that someone who is same-sex attracted might plead up and down, no, that's not me. This just happened to me, kind of thing. I'm going to stick with Scripture on this one and say that it's more likely that they're being deceptive, self-deceiving, or they're deceiving whoever they're telling this to, or whatnot. But the trick with what Sam Allberry was doing, and again, every proponent of SSA or Side B theology sort of has their own recipe for this, is it really ends up being a rhetorical bait and switch that is very effective on a lot of evangelical Christians, because if we're in Christ, we have a very hard time, and we should, quite honestly, being judgmental towards others and their sin, even because we know that the gravity of our own sin. We know what we've been saved from, so it's really hard for us to look at somebody else who's sinning maybe in a different way and say, you're in sin. Again, we know that we struggle with our own sin. We have our own proclivities. And yet, with this one here, we've made a special exception for it as the evangelical church because it's the culture's sin du jour. It's the sin of the day. It's the one that our modern Western culture is willing to give an exception to. And so along come these special categories that the Bible doesn't teach. The idea of someone being a quote-unquote homosexual, that's not in the Bible. We talk about it that way because people want to identify themselves that way, but that's not actually a biblical category. Making it a category, allowing for it to be some sort of a descriptor, like it is a legitimate delineator between one person and another person. Hey, I'm a homosexual and you're a heterosexual. It forces us to have to wrestle with, okay, that's something that's going to be with them and not going to change. How do we deal with it? And now along comes the repurposing of what I believe is a very, very rare and not common gift of singleness, like the Apostle Paul, repurposing this kind of stuff to act like singleness is a norm, that it should be just as normative as being married. And yet if you return to Genesis and you look at one of God's first instructions, be fruitful and multiply. Well, how can you be fruitful and multiply if you're single? You can't. And so you have to wrestle with passages where Paul talks about wishing everybody could be as he is and be single and devote themselves to ministry. You have to wrestle with that passage in light of God's one of his original commands to be fruitful and multiply. Paul says immediately after talking about wishing that all could be single like me and basically to be devoted to ministry, he says, however, if you're going to burn with desire, that it is better to get married. This is a rhetorical back and forth he's using to say, no, marriage is normal. Marriage is what you're supposed to do. Elders are to be the husband of one wife. A lot of folks would argue that this means that there shouldn't be any single elders. I think that probably doesn't hold water, considering that Paul described himself as an elder and yet was single, remained single. But it obviously means that if someone's an elder of a church, they only get one wife. They're a one-woman man, as we describe it. But the idea is that marriage and procreation and these things are normative, and the God-given desire to be naturally, physically attracted to the opposite gender is something that, just like the other desires that we have that can be corrupted and used for sin, and be brought under our sinful nature, that we mortify and we run away from those things, and we seek to bring all of our desires, all of the parts of our nature, under submission to God's righteousness and what's taught in his word. And there is no room for that. There is no room in that category of natural desires, things that God designed for good purposes, corrupted by sinful nature. There's no room in that at all for same-sex attraction. I'm not saying that we should not have sympathy for somebody that expresses that they're purportedly experiencing this, that they're having these attractions, but our response can never be, okay, let's see how we can give you a plan to live with it. It's a cancer. If we believe what the Bible teaches, that those that practice these things will not inherit the kingdom, then this is a salvific issue. This is somebody who is in danger of hellfire. And we know, because Jesus teaches it very clearly in Matthew 5, that sinful actions start with sinful desires. If you hate your brother, you hate your brother, you've murdered him in your heart. You lust after another woman, you've committed adultery in your heart. And will face judgment. Jesus, he connects these two things, and we cannot break them apart. We cannot say that the action is sinful, but the desire is something that you'll just struggle with, and as long as you can kind of keep it at bay, you're probably going to be okay. It shouldn't surprise us, although it should sadden us, that Sam Allberry has apparently not been able to live out the false teaching that he's been promoting. That shouldn't really surprise us as much as it should sadden us. But to get back to the church, I couldn't help but notice, I talked about this on the last intelligence briefing on YouTube, but if you haven't seen it, I'll talk about it a little bit again. The statement that came out from Immanuel Nashville was I don't know how to say it. It was a damning statement about their leadership, their ecclesiology, whatever they're practicing over there. They said, if you take the timeline at face value, and I think there's every reason to distrust, and presume that there's probably a lot of essential things we're not being told about this. But if you take the statement at face value, it basically says that Allberry was ordained as a pastor at the church in 2023, right? Then 2024 rolls along, and the church leadership is somehow, by some situation, or somebody reports it, or maybe even Allberry reports it, I don't know, they become aware of this inappropriate relationship with an adult male, as I'd said. It's an inappropriate relationship. To the extent of that, they're not specific about. Apparently, when this happens, they supposedly conduct an investigation and determine internally among their elders and their leadership that, well, it was unwise, but it doesn't rise to the level of disqualification. Again, they're applying side B theology here to say this didn't rise to a level of disqualification. Why? Well, because he at least as far as we can tell didn't act on it. He didn't act externally on what were clearly same-sex attraction that he admits he struggles with. Well, he didn't act it out, so it's it was unwise to get as close to this other person as apparently he did, but it's not disqualifying. Now, there's no indication that their church knew about this. And I'm sure that they didn't, because a church of that size, this thing gets out in the open. If the church knows about it, there's going to be somebody in there who tells somebody, and it winds up at Protestia or another outlet that something like this happened. Matt Chandler sent, arguably inappropriate texts, joking texts to a female staffer or a friend or something like this. And the village church, kind of had a big to-do about it, probably appropriately so. We don't have information to say that was handled inappropriately. But this one over at Immanuel Nashville, they say in 2024, we discovered that he had an inappropriate relationship with another man in 2022. Now, he didn't disclose this, when he was being ordained as an elder in 2023. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been discovered in 2024. And yet their response is not, hey, look, man, you deceived us. There's no room for deception among ordained ministers, among pastors and elders. That's not above reproach, deceiving us, hiding this from everybody. And so you're removed. That didn't happen. Instead, they say, well, it was unwise, but he's not disqualified, nothing to see here. Then supposedly, I think supposedly, in 2026, they come across more information. Again, how they come across it doesn't really specify. but more information indicating that the relationship in 2022 was beyond what supposedly they originally knew. And now they have a different perspective. Well, now I guess it's 2 strikes and you're out. And not only was the relationship supposedly beyond what they originally thought in 2024, but this is now twice that they realize that Allberry has deceived them. Again, they're not putting this in a statement, but the facts lie. There's no way to interpret their statement at face value and not come to these plain logical conclusions. If Allberry didn't tell them in 2023 when he was being ordained about the relationship, that's one deception, because he should have disclosed that. Especially if we can take them at their word and say, well, it was back then, it's over with, it's done, it's not going on still. Okay, why wouldn't you say that at that point? Why'd you hide it? And now 2026 comes along and supposedly there's more details about this. It's worse than they thought, and now it's so bad that they have to let him go. Now it's so bad that the Gospel Coalition's got to remove all of his work from the website. Which of course the Gospel Coalition was never opposed to what he taught. So the reason to move it from the website is just for PR purposes. Hey, this guy was teaching true things, but we don't want to take the heat. We don't want every time we publish something or put something on social media, people are like, hey, you still got that guy Allberry's stuff on your website. You guys are still compromised. Like, in other words, we're trying to put it out to pasture and then wait it out, and then trusting that people will forget eventually. Won't be that big of a deal. Obviously we won't forget. I would argue it's still an unrepentant thing until we know otherwise. But to get back to the church, 2026 rolls along. They supposedly know more about the nature of this, and now he's gone. This obviously represents, again, if we can take him at face value, a second deception, because, and it also represents, quite honestly, a non-thorough investigation, because they claimed in 2024 to have done a thorough investigation. And obviously the only thing thorough about it was, let's ask, Allberry and this other dude what this was, and just take them at their word. Never mind the fact that by the time that we're doing this investigation in 2024, he's already clearly lied to us in a pretty substantial, and I would argue, unquestioningly disqualifying way. He's lied to us, but our thorough investigation is basically going to be just talk to him, and whatever they say happened, whatever they say didn't happen. How do we know that this is the case? Well, because 2026 rolls along and they're saying there was more to it. We weren't told. So now we have a second deception by Sam Allberry. The church in their statement is saying things like, well, he's being cooperative, and he's being repentant, and he's being humble and all this. Well, how do you know that? He's lied to you twice now. What? Because his demeanor is a certain way, his attitude is a certain way. Because that's the standard they took in 2024. Again, read the statement, read it carefully. And you see they said, well, during our thorough investigation, because of the, basically, I don't think the word was disposition, but the posture, I think they said it was the yeah, that's right. The posture of Sam Allberry and the posture of this other person led us to conclude nothing to see here. Led us to conclude, hey, this was unwise, but he's not disqualified, no time off, no informing the church, nothing like that. It's all nothing to see here. Why? Because of the posture of the two primary witnesses to this, who have every motivation to lie about it. Now 2026 comes along, you find out he did lie about it. He didn't tell you everything. Not only he lied when he was being ordained, but then he lied when you investigated him. As we can now see, 2026 rolls along. Now he's out. Start to really parse this timeline and what they're saying, and does it actually make any sense? I would argue no, it doesn't make any sense. Why, if he clearly lied to you the first time, did you keep him on? Didn't tell anybody, just kept him on. And now supposedly 2026 rolls along, and now we know more, and now it's way worse. Even though supposedly the relationship is over, right? The inappropriateness of this was over in 2022. 2026 rolls along, and there was more to it, and now it's disqualifying. It just doesn't pass the smell test, ladies and gentlemen. What passes the smell test is the much more likely scenario that the true nature of this relationship was going to be published somewhere. Somebody was going to find out that this is what this relationship was. And they were going to put it out there, and there was going to be egg all over the church's face. And so this is their only option. We got to bite the bullet. We got to take care of this right now. And basically concoct what I think by any stretch of the imagination is a story. We're going to concoct this story that we found out more and now it's disqualifying, when probably, again, I mean, I'll say straight up, I don't have this factual information in front of me, but I think that this is a much more reasonable theory given what they've actually said and the way that this timeline works out. It's much more likely that they've always known the extent of this and just figured nobody else would find out. Again, 2024, they didn't tell the church. They made a claim about it, that they determined it was unwise but not disqualifying. They keep their SSA mascot, their reaching pastor that does all these conferences, reaching out to the quote unquote LGBT community. They sort of keep him in place. Nothing embarrassing yet. 2026 rolls along, and they realize, oh man, this is somebody knows this who's willing to go public with it. Somebody knows the true nature of this. Perhaps this other person is also a member of the church. Like it's going to be potentially a big scandal. Our only option is to throw Sam under the bus. Our only option is to put out this story. Some of it may be true, some of it may not be true, but that logically doesn't make any sense for a church that is claiming to take church discipline in these kind of matters seriously. The timeline doesn't make any sense. But we're going to put this out there, and hopefully, Sam's going to get, kind of destroyed in the public over this. We know that, but maybe they'll be so focused on him that they'll leave us alone. And I'm looking at this saying, the ecclesiology component of this is perhaps a bigger deal, a bigger issue than the SSA side B component of this, which we've talked about that for a long time. I think that false theology has been exposed in a lot of quarters, a lot of different institutions. That theology has been exposed, but what's not being talked about, at least as much as it should be, in my opinion, is the gravity of what the church leadership has admitted here. And, and this is not primarily because, this is Russell Moore's church or Gavin Ortland's church, Ray Ortland, this, Barnabas Piper, this crowd. Obviously that's a warning sign. But the bigger issue is how a supposedly supposed Orthodox Christian church comes across the information that a pastor prior to ordination, that a pastor deceived us, was ordained while hiding something of pretty significant consequence, and that wasn't immediately disqualifying. The relationship was unwise, and apparently they're considering, well, it was also unwise for him to not admit this while he was being ordained in 2023. I guess that was unwise as well. It makes much more sense that it was, hey, we know about this now, but nobody else seems to know about it, so let's just brush it under the rug. 2026 comes along, oh no, someone knows, or this is gonna come out publicly, and I suspect this will come out publicly more. Like this information, the true nature of this, and they said in the statement, well, even though it didn't go as far as it could have. Okay, I mean, we're gonna find out at some point, I think, likely find out exactly what that means, as offensive and gross as it might be, it probably is. We're likely going to find out at some point what it means to not go as far as it could have. Again, they're applying side B theology. Well, all side B theology is it didn't go as far as it could have, isn't it? All side B theology is the desires are there. He wants this. He looks at that. He's looking at that man the same way that he naturally would look at a woman, but at least it didn't go as far as it could have. I'm going to stop there because if I keep talking about it, it's probably going to get gross. That's probably unnecessary for the purposes of this podcast or this conversation. But that's I mean, in the statement, they basically put the motto of side B theology. It didn't go as far as it could have. Therefore, what? Well, if you're in the proponency of side B theology, you're saying, well, therefore it's not sin. In the case of the church's statement, it didn't go as far as it could have. So, it's not quite as bad as everybody might be imagining. That's all they're saying. It's not quite as bad as everybody could be imagining. Now, I mean, the guy's lied to you twice, so I'm not sure how you can just presume that. They're saying that, but they're taking the word of someone who's lied to them, and by the way, all of us, to in a second tier kind of a way, I guess, lied to everybody on a major thing twice. So why would we believe that? Why are they believing that? Well, it's their only option, because there's egg all over their face, and it's actually worse than they had just handled this in 2024. It's worse now. The cover-up is worse than the crime. In 2024, if Allberry brings this to their, or this comes to their attention, and they say, hey, it's not above reproach to have hid this from us prior to ordination, so you're going to step down, you're going to resign, or we're going to fire you, kind of thing. You're not going to be in ordained ministry here. Like, we wouldn't be looking at them saying that they mishandled it at all. We'd still be looking at them and saying that ordaining somebody who teaches side B theology was a sin in and of itself. But at least the action of when we found out that there was unadmitted sin and issues related to your position at this church, when we found that out, we got rid of you. We wouldn't be pointing the finger at their ecclesiology over that necessarily. But the fact that you knew it and you didn't tell anybody, and you acted like it was no big deal, and now all of a sudden it is a big deal. That's terrible leadership, terrible ecclesiology. Disqualifying for any leader at that church that was okay being lied to on that scale with no consequences. That's, again, why I say that this doesn't make any sense. That the idea that they knew the full scope of this back in 2024 and just thought it could be brushed under the rug in perpetuity, and now found out it couldn't, and so now they got to take this additional action, that makes a lot more sense. What doesn't make any sense is we were totally okay with him lying to our faces in 2023, not telling us about this, deceiving us, hiding this from us. That wasn't the problem. It was just unwise. The relationship was unwise. I mean, I don't think anybody with really a discerning and functional brain should accept that. That doesn't make any sense. But anyway, we'll see. We'll see what happens. If we find out, and I think we will find out eventually what the actual nature of all of this is, we'll try to be as careful as we can with reporting it and always analyzing it with an open Bible. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Bully Pew podcast. Stay tuned to protestia.com as always for your latest in Christian polemics and discernment news. Talk to you again real soon. As always, Semper Reformanda.